Coming up on this episode of Common Denominator.
I really do believe that in this generation, we can create a ripple effect for the generations to come around healing and around normalization of all of these emotions and of the human experience.
Hi, and welcome to Common Denominator. We focus on human connection and what brings us together. I'm Moshe Popack, and today, how we can heal our trauma and move past it. Almost all of us have experienced a traumatic event that still affects us. Not only that, we may also experience intergenerational trauma, when the effects of trauma are passed down to us from previous generations. My guest is Dr. Mariel Buque, a psychologist and intergenerational trauma expert who's appeared on The Today Show, ABC News, Essence, Allure, and more. She'll explain how trauma is passed down, the impact it has on us and our family, and how we can ultimately heal from it. Before we chat with Mariel, a quick reminder that if you like the show, please subscribe and follow me on social media at @mpopack. Now, here's my conversation with Dr. Mariel Buque. Hi, Dr. Mariel, and thank you for joining Common Denominator.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a joy to be with you.
Really a pleasure. So first, tell us a little bit about the concept of this intergenerational trauma.
Intergenerational trauma is the only kind of emotional trauma that is handed down family lines. So it's very unique in that way because it actually has a biological component, meaning that there is a genetic factor that ties into why we experience this kind of trauma specifically. And then there is the psychological aspect, which is basically everything that you experience once you're born. Whether you're in a family that has a lot of fights, or if there's a divorce, or if you experience bullying, if you had your own set of relationships that felt really traumatizing, literally everything that happens thereafter, all of that then gets activated. And the combination of the biology and the psychology then culminates into intergenerational trauma.
So that's interesting because when you say biologically, is that, because I know, does that have anything to do with like past life regression or things that happen to us in past lives, or is it that just our parents or grandparents, our genetics, when it talks about biologically? Which one are we kind of talking about that we kind of come into this life?
So on the biological side, we're talking about just about everything. However, I do take a more scientific angle for the most part when it comes to intergenerational trauma on the biology side, which means that I rely heavily on those genetic elements of just having had parents that were chronically stressed or chronically traumatized, and grandparents and great-grandparents and individuals that are part of our lineage that suffered a lot, and that then creates a body that responds to trauma in a certain way, and that is then passed down. However, there are many ways in which we, in this lifetime, would experience the hurt and pain of ancestors past, and that also is to be greatly considered in this work.
So, going through life as an adult, so what are some warning signs that you're experiencing this trauma?
We can even actually backtrack just a little bit beyond or before adulthood,
sure.
I would say.
I would love that.
Because people actually tend to be born into this emotional vulnerability that shows up when they're very young. And we tend to see these children now as being like the highly sensitives or intuitives, right? Like, and we all have some sort of an emotional capacity, but for the most part, children that are born from a place of trauma tend to have more of a sensitivity. And then when you prick them with life, that actually triggers the trauma. So they have a greater propensity to even experience trauma and stress, and to experience bigger trauma and stress inside of their bodies and their minds, because they have that emotional vulnerability to stress already.
Because I know, I don't want to get too much into myself and my journey, but I know I'd say I consider myself like a deep empath. And as a young child, I guess this is kind of the way I experienced it. People would speak when I was really young, and I would hear them speaking, and I would feel something else. Like it was no congruency. So I kind of like this deep sensitivity. When I was 5, unfortunately my parents went through a divorce, and the way I kind of see it, I guess for survival, kind of shut down completely. And then just going mechanical. When I got divorced, when I got married years later, I had to kind of relearn as like a little baby, kind of relearn and heal, and heal through that process. So I think I can relate to that concept. You know, kind of this concept. What are, in your practice, what are some practical ways? So someone comes in and they have this trauma that they're dealing with. What are some practical ways that they can deal with that to heal?
Well, I like to always do like a full system overhaul. So I like to make sure that we're taking care of the whole person. So my approach is very holistic. It's always going to be about mind, body, spirit, mind, body, soul. And what that means is that of the mind, we're going to do some of those traditional therapeutic practices, which is mostly talk therapy. We're going to be working with the history, right? Like unearthing a person's history, understanding all the different trauma responses that were represented in their family lineage so that they have a mind base, a cognitive understanding and compilation of what happened here across the generations. And so we do a lot of that work, but we also work on the body, and that's a really essential piece. That probably is the most essential of all because trauma is captured primarily as a body-based process. And so if we're going to be working with intergenerational trauma, we have to make sure that the person feels safe inside of their body, which means that we're going to be doing sound bath meditations. We're going to be doing some body-based movement like yoga or Tai Chi. Anything that can actually get the body moving some of that trauma out is going to be really essential. And then from the soul spirit perspective, we're going to be working on mostly how to ground the person, how to make them feel like a solid, like I am steady in this ground I'm standing on. And then also how they can be connected to other humans in a way that feels good to them rather than some way that feels like they're experiencing chaos and turbulence on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I like the, it's funny, we've bought some sound bowls, and for me, it was just it's so peaceful and so grounding. And it's funny, and then my son saw my daughter, about grounding. And, people make fun of it a little bit, but my daughter, she's 13, she was kind of grounding herself by hugging the tree. And I was like, oh, look at that. And he posted on the family chat, and then my wife's like, she's grounding herself. That's what she's doing.
So beautiful.
Right?
It's so interesting that your children are doing this because I always like to look at children for their ingenuity and how they can actually help us to see the world in a different way. Children know how to actually get through things in a better way than us adults do. Because us adults, we've already been pre-programmed and we already have our set way of coping through life. But children are still being creative about that process. And so when we look at them for the things that they're doing, I would very easily just adopt what a child is doing in order to heal and cope through life circumstances because they can be very creative and amazing in that way.
And I'll tell you something. People think I'm strange when I say this, but I think that kids have it right more than adults for some reason.
Yes.
I'll tell you, it's like, because the whole thing is, as adults, you have these boxes and these things, and it stops the creativity. As humans, we're supposed to be creative. We're supposed to be free. And you see that in the kids. And I always make the joke, it's like, why do you think so many kids adults even go to Disney World? They want to go back to nostalgia, back in the day.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, absolutely. To a place that felt, because Disney made a lot of us feel like, we were able to go into this fantasy world where there was a lot of healthy escapism. And of course, we would want to go there for sure. I mean, I think healthy escapism is something that I invite in even for the work as adults in intergenerational trauma, but even just in day-to-day life.
For sure. And I always had this debate also about, I know you talked about, looking back, like factually kind of what happened, and I always debate this in my mind when it comes to therapy. How much time do you like to spend on, the patient comes in and about looking back at the past? Because I always say, time is moving forward, just logically. How much time do you devote to that? Like looking back, kind of what happened, and I kind of feel like for me, it's, poor me, and then you're reliving this thing. But you probably have to go back there in order to bring it up and let it go. So I don't know what that balance is.
I mean, you framed it perfectly. That was beautiful. And I would spend as much time as is needed. Every person is different, but I usually do work with individuals to map out a family tree. And until we get to every leaf, right? Until we get to every piece of that soil and every aspect of what that tree needs to be representative of, we probably won't stop. However, I do take pauses because sometimes people do feel like certain things are coming up and it can be healthy to process them. But for the most part, we want to build out the history as far back as we can. And what that does for a person is that it brings them a lot of clarity and it gives them an understanding of what it is that they've inherited, what it is that they're holding on to as far as trauma responses. And from there, we can actually map the work forward. So it is really essential, even though it's very hard work.
And I'm thinking about is it years and years of work in order to constantly manage? Because I can imagine you're going through your life. I know even me, I spend a ton of time on self-awareness, growth, therapy, just trying to be a better person. Do you find that it takes years, months in order for someone to have a good foundation to be healthy and not allow the past traumas to haunt them?
I'll be 100% honest. It does take a lot of work, which can take a number of years. However, when you think about for individuals like ourselves, right? Fellow empaths, individuals that are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, we've been sorting through this for many decades. So what's 1 to 2 to 3 years of doing the work so that the next 50 doesn't look like the first 50? It's worth it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I always use this line. I was a guest on a friend's podcast, and I love this line. And when does that start? Is you get sick and tired of being sick and tired. So you begin,
yes.
right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So
and that, if it needs to get to that point to catapult you forward and for you to literally look back at your life and say, I never want to go back there again, then let that be, the motivator.
And I think myself as a father, how do I make sure that I don't pass, right? I want to break it, that my kids don't, I don't pass on that trauma. How do I make sure to do that?
Literally the most popular question that I get. And and I really love this question because it is the question of a cycle breaker. It's an individual who has decided that the cycle ends with them. They do not wish for their children to be inheritors of pain. And in great part, right now in this generation, we have this generational privilege, as I call it, of having information at our disposal that is healing centered. We have so many books that help us to sort through elements of trauma and stress. We have podcasts like this one, right? We have so many resources, and we can take those resources and make sure that they're available. Of course, it needs to be age appropriate, but to our children. And if we need to be the people that actually bridge the information so that it is age appropriate, then we do that. For example, if you're learning that meditation actually restructures the brain and restructures your cells in a way that actually creates greater relaxation and ease in your body for the long term, why not create a practice of meditation for your 5-year-old? If you know that that's going to set them up for emotional wellness for the long term, that might be the generational privilege that you have that you then can help your child to acquire and inherit.
Right, because I think about what a gift if whatever, and it's all blessings. I live in gratitude, but what a gift would be if imagine my kids, I have 10 children, and if they could start off their foundation, they could start off like a blank slate. I just think about the years and years and years just to get to a whiteboard, a blank slate to begin my journey of growth. So I think about part of the thing is my wife and I, we just have complete open dialogue. You can ask us anything, you can say anything, and some guests that come, they think it's a little out there, but I feel that open dialogue, especially in this society, let everything happen in our house, good, bad, ugly, everything, and then we talk through things. I mean, that's just a practice that we use.
It's beautiful. It's like a shame-free home, kind of.
Right.
Like
I want to normalize that.
Dialogue.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've said on a bunch of podcasts, I said, what a world would be because I know that it stops movement. If we can get rid of guilt, fear, shame, and trauma. If we can normalize those things, so I guess I have to try to lead by example, to be as authentic and truthful in everything, and model that to my kids, to my wife. Try, and I wish and more and more and more people no, this is what it is. We are strange as humans. I don't know, something like that, right?
Yeah, I think we share that vision, you and I. I would certainly love for there to be a world where we can have that normalization. The fact that we are living in a world where we're having public conversations about it right now, which is very different than when I started in this profession, is a move in the right direction. So I'm really hopeful. And I really do believe that in this generation, we can create a ripple effect for the generations to come around healing and around normalization of all of these emotions and of the human experience.
Yeah, that would... That's the dream. That's the dream, and I think it's happening because as we raise our frequency and vibration, the more we do that, the more people see it, and the more people will come along. That's hopefully. But I always wondered this in my head: why is it in general that people don't want to see therapists, just in general?
Well, seeing a therapist is really scary. If we were to be frank about it, it makes it so that you have to have a mirror into your own soul. We are not trained as humans to be self-introspective and to be introspective and to be self-reflective. And we basically are thrown into this very unknown space where we're having to do that on a weekly basis. It's very scary. So the idea of therapy has been scary for a very long time. We are destigmatizing quite a lot. But the reality of it is that therapy can be scary because of what it makes you face about yourself, your life, and the ways that you're showing up to the world.
And one question I ask all guests is, in your mind right now, what comes to you, what is something that you're deeply grateful for?
Oh, I love that. Well, I am always grateful for the fact that I have a really deeply loving family unit. As imperfect and kooky as they might be, they're like, just bursting with love, and I'm always surrounded by it. So always grateful for that. And
also, what's something, it could be anything, what's something that people don't know about you?
Something that people don't know about me, that I am somebody who really likes a lot of alone time, probably more than your general person. Empath and somewhat of a loner. So the two make it for an existence where I spend a lot of alone time, but I'm never really lonely. I just like to be alone.
Yeah, I think that balance, even in a healthy marriage or any relationships, is time together, time apart. And the work, it took me a long time to be comfortable being alone, but my best version of myself is when I'm just alone, writing, thinking, reading, music. Those are definitely. And I know you have a podcast. I know you have a book, Break the Cycle, and I want to just tell you, it's just been so amazing to have you on Common Denominator as a guest. And I want to just let the audience, how can they find out more about you, more about your podcast, and more about your book?
Thank you. Everything can be found at drmarielbuque.com, and that's the general hub for everything that I'm up to. So you can find me there. So
let's keep pushing day by day grassroots towards the dream, and I really appreciate it. It's really been great, and let's hope the whole world heals.
Yes, let's hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Mariel. Please subscribe to the show so you don't miss an episode, and follow me on social media at @Popack. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you again soon.